Hi there, everybody, and welcome to our hangout today, talking about collective enoughness. I'm Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future, and just as a quick reminder, if you want to follow along via Twitter, the hashtag is CTFuture. We are going to get to as many of those questions and comments as we can, but I know that there's a lot of people watching, so if we don't get to a question or a comment that you've got, please stick it right there in the comments at the blog, and we will promise to follow up afterwards. So I want to give you a quick, what is Creating the Future? Creating the Future is a collection of people all over the world in a grand experiment to see what can happen over a 10-year period, and our 10-year clock starts next year, 2017. What can happen over 10 years if everybody everywhere knows how to bring out the best in each other? What could be different in the world if we all know how to bring out the best in each other? And so part of our experiment is having lots of conversations, and I'm excited to have this conversation today in honor of Giving Tuesday about collective enoughness. So I would like to introduce everybody who's sitting here with me, and I will start with you, Ifeoma Edugbe, if you could let us know just a little bit about you and your connection to this whole topic of collective enoughness.
Certainly. So my name is Ife. I'm based in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and have had a great and interesting winding path and relationship with Creating the Future. So thank you very much, Hildy, for inviting me to be part of this. Collective enoughness is literally one of my favorite things. It's frankly where I think we find hope, or at least where I find the hope for communities and community development, which has always been a passion of mine. At the moment, just professionally, I work with an organization called Harbor Compliance, also based in Lancaster, that does compliance support for businesses and nonprofits across the country in about 28 countries outside of the United States. But that's kind of where I am after about a 20-year history in the community benefit sector, working with all different types of organizations, and really having the opportunity to play around with the idea of collective enoughness. And I was very grateful when I managed to get that language from Creating the Future and from you, Hildy. So thank you for that. Like I said, I think collective enoughness is where I find hope, because it's, again, it gave language to a feeling that I always had, that there are plenty of resources out there that exist. It's finding them, it's making the connections to them, it's building the relationships with the people who have them, the vast majority of whom I believe to be very, very good people who are doing their best and trying to do the best for their communities around them. And when all of that can come together and we do take the time and do the work to build those relationships, you really start to see goodness scale up in an amazing way. That really benefits just about any mission that I've ever been part of or been witness to. So I think the thing that's really exciting to me about both Giving Tuesday, which I also love, and the concept of collective enoughness is it's this great opportunity to celebrate and frankly remind ourselves that this is work and a lifestyle that we should continue for the entire year, not just on one day, but it's that day where we get to pause and remind ourselves, oh, right, this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be tapping into the resources that I have and that the organizations I'm part of have, and figuring out what can I do to support the mission and visions of other organizations, and how will all of that coming together ultimately make a greater whole.
I love that. I just wrote down the words, goodness scaling up.
I'm not sure that was grammatically correct, but
yeah, it works for me. Totally works for me. Rebecca, your path along the collective enoughness way.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, it was getting a little marbly. Hello, I'm Rebecca Hurd, and I'm beaming in from the snowy mountains of McCall, Idaho today, and a brilliant sunny day here. So lots of happy snow dances in my community, because snow is an economic engine here for sure. And it also creates that sense of community and collective enoughness. I think to me, collective enoughness is the language to who I've been since I came into this world. I think it came from my mother saying to me, you've always wanted to help people, but what the help means is really wanting people to be comfortable, wanting people to feel connected, people to feel welcome. So it's always been a space that I'm very comfortable being in, because that's just who I am to my core, and the belief of when we let humans shine, this is where we do all gravitate to this way of being. So I'm co-director at Creating the Future with Hildy, pushing everything forward in our mission to create that beautiful world that works for everyone. And the way I found Creating the Future and Hildy about 4 or 5 years ago was, I think, that spirit inside of me of collective enoughness. But like Iffy said, I maybe didn't have the language, but it was who I was to my core and what I took as a truth. So my work past has been a blend of community benefit sector work in a range of organizations, as well as outside helping in many different capacities, as well as working in very big global companies. But all of those are just about people, whether it's a one-person shop or a huge global organization. So what does it look like to have healthy and supportive systems? So I think when we can reflect back, not from a lens of sadness, but to see the systems that so many humans are operating in, that comes from a place of scarcity, versus what does it take to shift our thinking? And that's where I really delight, because if people are willing to start experimenting, change does happen very quickly. And it's that sharing of who you are. And if you share who you are, you're then going to be sharing all your stuff as well.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. And Steve Wright, please talk a little bit about you. It is such a joy having you here. And if you want to show everybody where you are, I especially love where you're sitting.
So I am in a classroom in Oakland, California, at Oakland Technical High School. There's the bulletin boards and the put your paper and all that good stuff. I started my career as a high school teacher in the neighborhood of 25 years ago. I taught as a high school teacher for 10 years, and then spent the last 15 years in various places in the social sector, often in technology, social enterprise, at the edges of impact investing. And what has been sort of the progression of my career is a progression starting with questions of how do I know if I am any good, and helping sort of social sector organizations, individuals, be able to ask that question of themselves and their organizations, and come to valuable and inexpensive answers to how do I know if I'm any good. And more recently have moved into a place, Hildy, that I think is maybe more about this conversation, the collective enoughness, that idea of collectedness in general. And that's a friend of mine and I have this concept that we call backside of the circle, where the front side of the circle is where we, slam into each other with our ideologies, and the backside of the circle may be where we can meet as neighbors across our difference. And there's this spectacular talk that I heard, and it was one of those, sort of stupid catalytic moments where you say, that changed my life. But I went to a conference, and Walter Brueggemann, who is an Old Testament scholar, and I'm not a person of faith, and so it's weird that is where the insight came to me, but gave this talk on neighborliness, where he talked about the protocols of neighborliness being in contestation with the protocols of purity. And the most important question that we can ask of ourselves is, who is my neighbor? And that question, which, it came at the right time in my life, has informed me back into the classroom. And that's why I'm here, because that's how I see what we can be doing in our world these days is understanding. And, I've taken a very sort of physical and proximity focus on the concept of neighbor and Oakland and classroom. I think, you can define neighbor in lots of ways, but it's become an organizing principle for me.
Wow. And when I think of neighbor, I think immediately, the minute you said that, Steve, I thought of my neighbors who moved in next door. And this probably is, Rebecca, you said, as did you, Iffy, that this is sort of who you've been. That sense of together is, I think, who I've always been as well. And the story that I'll sort of kick off with just goes right to what you're saying, Steve, because it just jumped into my brain when you said it. My neighbors moved in next door about 20 years ago. The house is a rental, maybe 10 years ago. House is a rental, and it had several people in there, back and forth. And when they moved in initially, they were loud, they were screaming, they had kids all over the place. And your immediate instinct is, really, when are they going to move out? And we started to get to know each other. We're at the point now where we have the keys to each other's houses, where when they need an extra table for Thanksgiving, they just pull it out of the carport. They don't ask. It's just there. We came home from vacation yesterday, and I said, oh, the trash can is out. And we immediately realized that they needed an extra trash can after Thanksgiving, and so they used our trash can. And when you said neighboring, that's exactly what it brought up for me. Is there's that sense with your neighbors that, I love Justin Pollock talking about when his neighbors are away, they just automatically go out and snow blow each other's walkways, so it looks like somebody's home. Mm-hmm. And so I love that concept of neighbor, because that's so at the heart of it. When you guys have seen collective enoughness in action, when you've actually seen it in discrete ways, what have you seen? Because I know that each of you has had experiences with this in different ways. What strikes you? What have you seen?
I think it's what you feel. I think it's how you're feeling inside is joy and energy and life-giving and excitement. People coming together with who they are, not a job title. So if this is whether this is a community or a team who works really well together, what you see is the whole person coming into the room with all of their energy and all of their goodness. And yep, they've got skills, and maybe that's why they were hired and put into that role, but they're also coming in with everything that's them. When I think about what it looks like in action, is everyone's hugging each other and saying hello. Like, you physically interact in a different way when you know the whole human in a setting.
Talk a little bit, Rebecca, because you started a community hub in your neck of the woods in Idaho. Talk a little bit about what that looked like, so that folks who are watching, they're like, okay, collective enoughness, it's this concept that together we have everything we need, that it's only when we're on our own that we experience scarcity. And that was at the core of what you did at the hub. Talk a little bit about what that looked like in the actual forming of it, and what that created.
Sure. I think, it came from, again, as Iffy had pointed out, is the majority of humans in this world are very, very good people who want very good things for their communities, but it's often operating in maybe perhaps in a system of doing stuff to the people versus bringing all the people to the conversation in a community setting. So moving from, in this instance, people were invited to come to a conversation because the only way our youth can be at their best and reach their highest potential is if their caregivers, their parents, the administrators in the school, their postman, the bus driver, if everyone in the community has the opportunity to feel that sense of belonging, to feel valued and heard. So it was helping to move from a programmatic focus in a community to more about how do we want to be when we be together. And I think very often people are brought together in a community meeting with assumptions. We're going to go around and say our job titles and say what, program I have. And my program needs more clients. Can you help me put posters up? Versus, what does it take to actually talk about what is it we all want together? And the only way anyone is going to be able to want to talk about that is if we get to know each other first. So this was also in inviting people to come into the room and share who they are. Getting to know who you are actually leads to real significant doing in the community, but it looks a lot different. when people take the time to get to know each other, you know, from a very tactical lens, tent cards are gone. Your name and your job title is not who you are. So let's stop using that. What could be possible if you have a name tag with your first name and something awesome in your life? And these became rituals with intentionality in this community, because everyone knew when we're coming together in this meeting, we're going to start right out with what's awesome. And if you're thinking about that on your way to the meeting, that sets the tone for how you walk into that room. And that doesn't mean that everything is always deliciously wonderful in your life, because people also came and shared real things going on in their life. But you got to come in and celebrate each other. And every single time there were new faces in there. So what does it mean to provide context, to be welcoming and nurturing to people who aren't really sure what they're even coming into, is to ensure you always provide context to what it is you're stepping into, and have other people model and share this way of being, of here's my awesome, and to have people get the light and be like, I've never been asked what's awesome in my life. And then the fact that anything we were being in there is something you could take and experiment in your work life, at your dinner table, when you go back to that staff meeting. What could be possible if you spent some time getting to know each other first? So
it was so fun when we were, Dimitri and I were in Idaho and had the opportunity to participate in one of Rebecca's hub meetings. And as something that started out not as a, you bring what you have and I'll bring what I have and we'll see what we can share. But as something that started out with 3 or 4 people getting together, just talking about what they loved about their communities. And, you know, that old shampoo commercial. And she told 2 friends, and she told 2 friends, and she told 2 friends. But it was this remarkable sense. These folks sat together for 3 hours once a month and shared what was going on in their work in a really human way. And it wasn't, I'm working on this project and I need help. It was, here's what's going on. And yes, if they needed help, they could ask about it. If they needed stuff, they could ask about it. There were easily 80 people in the room when we were there, sitting for 3 hours just to talk. And this is in a relatively rural area in Idaho. This was not in Boise. Just coming together, and it had grown to that point where they were sharing what they had. They were sharing it because they knew who they were, not because they were there to get stuff. And I think that's just such a big difference.
And I think in the community, to actually know the human who works at the organization versus being told in one organization, oh, you need to talk to that organization because they also do some kind of stuff like we do, or they might have what we need. But what's possible when you actually know Joe Smith, Sally Davis? I know her, and I also know her whole story. And again, this isn't saying that people had to come and share very, very personal stuff. People were coming in so jazzed up. We celebrated when someone cut bangs for the first time in her life, and she showed everyone her new haircut. And that's what it means to show up and be real humans and not robots slotted into my job title. And I was told to be at this meeting because I may have a title that somehow has something to do with client services or community engagement. And that might have been how some people first came to the group. But the beauty was when people start coming and they're community members, no job titles are even asked of you when you come in. I love my community, and I was told this was a place to come.
Very cool. Very cool. What have you guys seen that sense of collective looks like in action?
I'll share some of the moments that I've been part of, and there's several that are kind of floating through my brain at the moment, and frankly, giving me great joy to remember them. But I will say, I think all of them, if I look back to try and figure out kind of where that was really birthed, it came from coming together, sharing ideas, and telling some of the stories, like Rebecca's saying, about who we were, maybe work that we were passionate about, and then really allowing the space to be creative about how groups could come together or individuals come together and say, you know, hey, there's something I could do to maybe support that or grow that, and then being really open to sharing with each other how to make it great for both, and how to make it and really get at what a true partnership is. And that idea of, if we're truly coming together, we're equals. It's not, my idea and everybody's a minion working for me. And so some of the things, one of the greatest experiences I had was literally came out of my own frustration in attempting to drop off a donation for a group that was doing housing, emergency housing on cold nights, a code blue shelter. And one day saw that they needed hand warmers, and I thought, that's easy. I can pick up some hand warmers. And then the drop off of the hand warmers became really involved because they were all volunteers. It was, I think, a dentist's office that was taking the donations, and he had kind of part-time hours. And so I was kind of racing to get there at the right time to drop off this donation. And kind of just got into conversation with the dentist when I got there about what he was doing and why, and what his passion was around this cause, and some of the things that they needed. And I had this idea, well, I have a space, and it's open 7 days a week. And so maybe it's really easy for me to give you space as a drop-off point and help spread the word about what you're doing, make it a little easier for you to collect donations. And let's come together. And frankly, when, as I was working at a domestic violence organization at the time, a lot of the women that they were housing on cold nights had been victimized at some point. So once we started talking, there was a real natural synergy to our coming together in the first place. And then that kind of continued to grow. And in another conversation that I was having with a group of people about what I was doing, I thought, oh, it'd be really great to figure out, how do we talk about what we're doing, how we're bringing organizations together. And one gentleman that I was talking to was an administrator at a technical high school. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting having a conversation with high school students in a design class. And, this teacher needed a project, and it was this real life project they could work on. And the next thing you know, I got 30 potential logos for the idea. And these kids got this really great experience where, they got to participate in this process. They pitched their concept. They kind of followed it start to finish, and then got to see the end product and know that that was their work attached to this community-wide effort. And frankly, that teacher got a project that she could grade with her students. And it was just, for me, very, again, it's that hope. It's that moment where, I don't know that we all would have answered the same call, but once we sat down and started talking about, here's what I'm bringing to the table, and here's what I have to contribute, and this is what, the impact that I ultimately want to have on my community. And there's generally some way to do that, and kind of, again, right, watch everybody's boats rise a little higher, and right, it's the scaling up of the goodness.
I'm going to frame that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My path recently has been, I spent the last 6 years working in international development. I guess 6 years. And a lot of that work I did sitting in my shed in my backyard, literally in a garden shed in my backyard. And it was very sort of detaching work to a certain extent. I loved the work, and I take an awful lot of pride in what we were able to accomplish. But at the same time, it was not sort of in community, right? And now I'm in this place with 120 humans every day, and we know each other's business, right? Every day. And so it's a remarkable thing to be sort of physically present with a lot of people every day. And that, so there's a huge piece of that for me that's incredibly meaningful, especially in a world of, Facebook and Twitter, and where there's a lot of sort of aimless vitriol flying about. So I think that's part of sort of what I've been kind of obsessed with and thinking about. And so to me, I'm always trying to figure out, I'm a big old nerd, and I'm always trying to figure out sort of like, what are the numbers and the measurement, and how can we sort of begin to sort of find the direction in which the goodness lies, in ways that provide signposts, so that when we see those signposts, we know to head in those directions. I'm not idealistic enough to believe that there are pure measurements of these sorts of things, but directionality, I think, is really important. And one of the things that I've really sort of glommed onto recently are the relationships between diversity and resilience. We talk a lot about diversity as a good thing, but I think we often hold that in sort of our philanthro mind, in some sort of like, I'm a good person if I like diversity. When the reality is that without diverse communities, we suffer, right? Diverse monocultural communities are sick, are stunted across multiple variables. There's a spectacular study by the Equality of Opportunity Project where they really look at where are the communities with upward mobility, the communities with growth across the communities, and they're the communities that are the most diverse across many different variables. Family type, racial diversity, economic diversity, the whole bit. And so I think that's a piece that we miss, and especially now at this exact moment in time, where we are getting race and diversity so incredibly wrong, that we have to begin to build the lexicon around the inherent value, the absolute biological and economic value of diversity. That we become stunted when we aren't. And that's how I begin to understand community these days, and health in communities, and vibrancy in communities, is that relationship between diversity and resilience, right? So monocultural communities are by definition not resilient because they don't have multiple pathways in order to deal with failure. Diverse communities have many different pathways in order to deal with, manage failure, and move into success.
Wow. There's that whole piece about failure. We so emphasize succeed or fail. And the whole piece about diversity and inclusion and resilience is about words like adapt and learn and experiment. And when you're adapting and learning and experimenting, there's no failing. There's just more learning and adapting and experimenting.
Yeah.
And it feels better. I mean, the thing that that's okay. Steve has mentioned that he is in a classroom where if he doesn't get up every once in a while and wave his arms around, it'll go dark.
The lights turn on. Yeah.
I just figured you were your own example of diversity. We're just going to change everything.
Just get up and leave every once in a while. A bell will ring in the near future too, so I'll try and there's something about just watching you guys talk about this, you smile. In each case, when you guys are talking, you're smiling. And Steve, when you talked about moving from the shed in the backyard to actually being with humans. Rebecca, when you talked about gathering a whole bunch of people who are working in isolation and coming together. And Iffy, when you talk about the conversations that we've had, we smile when that happens, and we think about that as a one-off thing. We so often think about, I was in this group and it was the coolest thing. And the thought that's occurring to me as we're talking here is that the difference that I see, and I see, Steve, it being almost our salvation in this time of such stress, is when we see community as the go-to rather than the exception. When it's our first thought, rather than, oh yeah, I had a spiritual experience once, and I'd love to have that feeling again. I wonder what it takes in your experience, where you've experienced that's the first. Am I echoing? You're right.
Is it
a little bit?
All right. Well, we'll see what the Google has in store for us. but just that sense of collective enoughness, community, being together with our whole persons, as the first thought rather than the afterthought or the, oh, that was really nice. Where have you guys experienced that? Because I get to experience it all the time because I'm here at Creating the Future and we're playing with that. But where do you guys see that?
I mean, for me, a lot of, so when I was sort of training to be an adult in college, I still can remember late 80s, early 90s, the really intense intellectual conversations around power structures. And I don't see that critique happening in our world as effectively anymore. And so I'm kind of coming at an answer to that maybe from a backside, Hildy, and I sure see the world more politically than I wish I did these days. But I think we need to have much more rigorous critiques of power when we think about community now. And so we use terms like inclusion, which is a term that embeds the concept of power, and it has a who is including whom scenario to it, right? And so where I see these sort of a collective happening are, at places like in a classroom where you have an explicit definition of purpose, or at a dinner table, or in a park, and those sorts of places, right? And so I'm not sure how we translate that into a place where we get things done, sort of, quote unquote. And there certainly is an intense power structure in the classroom, one that I try to deconstruct as much as I can. And that's an interesting conversation too. So maybe I'm just rambling around your question there, Hildy.
That's okay. We need more rambling. Okay, we need more rambling. How about you, Rebecca? I know you've seen systems. Even just the other things that you're creating. What are you seeing that?
I'm hearing you echo, but I don't know. Now I'm hearing myself echo.
I'm gonna ask if we all, and hopefully that will, if we're not talking, mute.
Well, I was just, when you asked about when do we see collective enoughness in action, I think it's even getting to the things that people delight in. A potluck meal in your community, people delight in, because especially when you're not assigned by your last name. Like, the beauty of the experiment is bring whatever you want to bring, because that's something that you've made with love to share with love. And if there's 20 side dishes, who cares? I think of potlucks, and I think of something as, like, I was talking with a woman yesterday, and when I played sports throughout my life, the sense of collective enoughness you feel in a team working toward a very defined goal. Like, here, we want to win this game. We are in it to win it, and we're here to support each other, is the spirit of collective enoughness. And then I think also the spirit of collective enoughness is only possible when there's the feeling of individual enoughness. And that's, I think, often very much lacking in our systems, in the sense of, you're smart, you'll figure it out. Or, if you work hard, you can get there. Those types of messages that have been heard for so often means, once again, I'm by myself in this place of scarcity. So I think when there's the spirit of, you do have incredible gifts, but there's also people who can contribute to the bigger whole. So I am part of something larger than myself, is where people then delight, but often coming into the space of feeling inadequate, or I'm just the data analyst. Heck, you're way more than the data analyst. You may be great with numbers, but what does it take to have conversations in this setting that you begin to see, and I see you for all of who you are? And I think when people are willing to, if you have a personal experience in a meeting or in a potluck and deconstruct what's really going on, what is your personal commitment to take that and go experiment someplace else with it? So it's not a one-off, So it can be your way of being. And I think that's the personal choice. Do I show up with the spirit of collective enoughness in my day? Am I asking these types of questions? Am I noticing the questions that I haven't even realized are the ones that I'm always answering?
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing that we talk so often about sharing our stuff, and it's a one-off until we're sharing who we are. And when we're sharing who we are, then it's a lot easier to share what we have. And that's just because that's a lot of what you've been talking about, Iffy, and the stuff that you've been doing as well.
Well, I think to me the thing that's right is always interesting about the sharing of who we are is, or interesting and challenging, is that it takes a certain level of vulnerability, right? We have to be willing. There's inviting the whole self in the room, but there's also being willing to bring the whole self in the room. And, I've had the good fortune over the course of my life, and frankly, even within my professional career space, to be around people who were willing to kind of struggle with those conversations around what it takes to bring your whole self into the room. And I know that there are times where I have to remind myself, frankly, to do that. Again, I think it's a really vulnerable act to commit yourself 100% to that. I have to say, I was up very early this morning because I knew that part of what would be really good for me in my day was if I actually went to the gym. And so I was at the gym and I was listening to a podcast, and this is reminding me, and I will butcher the quote completely, but it was a conversation with Parker Palmer and somebody else. And I'm a big fan of Parker Palmer, but and it was a conversation about rebellion, and it was talking about it being an act of rebellion for someone to try to show up trying to be whole. And frankly, that there's an act of rebellion just in the fact that you're willing to explore that there's this wholeness that exists beyond the brokenness that we see in the world. And so there's a piece of it that's me as an individual being vulnerable enough to engage with my whole self. But I also think that there's this additional piece where, right, we haven't built and designed systems for that, right? We haven't built and designed systems in a way that even systems exist or structured for the whole. And so, the reality is when I start bringing my whole self into the room, a system has to adjust. And so it's kind of that willingness, right? A piece of collective enoughness is that willingness for not only for me to do the work, but to honor that system and to give, allow grace for where that system isn't structured or designed for that and may have to adjust, right? And then you're really hitting that collective enoughness jackpot when both start to work together and shift and frankly give grace to each other, because in the end we're all humans. And so I bring with it some clever stuff every once in a while and a whole lot of crap on other occasions. And we have to kind of sift through that, but there's a piece of that takes incredible courage and incredible willingness, that willingness again to come back and to be vulnerable and say, here's who I am, and this is who I am coming into the room. And if this room wasn't built for me, all of that, are there ways that we can come together to adjust?
Yeah, the courage is required when the systems aren't there. And when the systems are finally there, then it requires less courage because that's just the way we be with each other in this particular setting. And then we go someplace else and we get knocked about.
Yeah. I think when with the being able to notice that the systems is a huge step in itself for each of us to start paying attention to all of the systems we've been in without really noticing, here's what's really going on. I have the onboarding to my new job. It's all about the accolades of what I did before I came into this new job. And then when I get there, everyone says, we're so glad you're here because there's all this backlog of work, and go. And I better produce results because I want to be a productive new member of this team. And what does it take for that manager to create a new system where every single time we welcome a new team member, we all hear each other's story. We hear why we're glad you're here. That's the reality. Is these are human focused systems that the resource is us placing time and value on it. It doesn't take getting some training in something. It's like, if we were aiming to bring out the best in each other, what conditions would create that? And I have such power, no matter where I am in a system, to lead from the middle, of my dining room table with a different kind of way of being that I want to have each night when we end our day. We all have that potential. It comes with that willingness to start playing with stuff. Like, what's the little step I could take that I feel comfortable with?
And I think you can capture it in, right, again, it is those really simple, quick, easy ways. And I'm thinking, and it's, I think you just described me on my new job, because, right, it's an incredibly productive workplace and I'm working hard to catch up. But I had this really great conversation today with a nonprofit based in Tennessee. And what was interesting is I get on the phone with this guy, and it's the first time that we're having a conversation. And it was as simple as asking him why they do what they do and what they're hoping, like what success really looks like for them, to just better understand his work. And I said, but, before we talk about anything else, I want to understand, what is it that you are trying to do? What are you hoping to achieve? And he paused and was quiet for a minute. And then he said, thank you so much for asking me that question. And he's like, I love why. And the why is absolutely at the heart of what we're doing. And it kind of shifts the whole tone. It allowed that space for, kind of him to let his guard down and just have a kind of a relaxed conversation with me, and just suddenly we're working together. It's not that somebody has a problem and somebody has a solution, but how are we going to partner on this particular project and move it forward? And again, right, everybody's looking to scale up. What can we do? And I'm sitting here talking from a compliance standpoint on this call today, but there's a role that plays in giving you the ability to scale your vision. So what can we do to make that happen? And there's really, really simple ways, I think, that we can bring that out and pull those passions out in people, and help make sure that we're all looking at the same whole picture.
And I think that sets the tone for every single time you will be with that man again. That first interaction is where you had the potential for, what do I want this conversation to make possible? Because this is not a transaction. This is my relationship with this fellow human who wants to create a better world.
I'm listening to what you're talking about, Iffy, and you're working in compliance right now. And Steve, you have been working so much in the social sector in terms of measurement of outcomes, which is all, it may not be compliance, but it's along that same sort of point. I think it's time to get up and wave your arms around. And the thing that I'm wondering, because I know, Steve, that you worked sort of at the edge of for-profit, nonprofit in corporate settings and corporate foundations, and I'm curious what you saw in those settings, specifically around the sharing of resources. Because one of the things that we so often hear about in especially in the community sector, but you also hear it in the for-profit sector, is I got to protect my own stuff, and if I don't protect mine, you're going to take it. And I'm curious what you saw in the realms that you worked in terms of the sharing of resources.
Yeah, so interesting question. I mean, one of the things I learned maybe later than I should have is that the sort of for-profit, nonprofit, the legal distinctions are pretty irrelevant. And there's a lot of different ways to define yourself, and there's pros and cons to all of them. Though we do tend to sort of, cordon off nonprofits in a certain way sometimes. The way that resource sharing and not sharing sort of falls out, as I see it, is money, right? So there are those who have it and those who are asking for it, those who are giving it, those who are receiving it. There's those lucky sort of few, I don't know, that lucky is maybe not a relevant adjective, but there are these few in the middle who are sort of financially sustainable for one reason or another. So because of the economic system that we all live within, I believe we have internalized this idea of wealthy equals worthy. And because of that, we attribute a value beyond numbers to money. And that causes us to behave in a really dysfunctional way around how we share resources. And so that's the fundamental problem with how we are moving our world forward with a mind to sort of the social sector. And as I look at, sort of who gets to make the decisions and who stands at podiums, who writes checks, and what do we say when we want to receive them, and all of those truths, half-truths, and lies that we play with in that process, I think that's the dysfunction that we really need to address.
It is. It's so remarkable to me, the value. I scribbled down what you talked about, attributing the value beyond anything that the money is actually valuable for, because money is only valuable in what it can buy us. Otherwise you just have like a bathtub full of it that you could roll around in. But
and to be very real, what it can buy us is the lights staying on in our organizations that are saving people's lives. So it's not, I don't mean to sort of trivialize it in another way at all, right? Yeah. So this dance is ancient and will be with us to some extent forever. And it is, the sort of the money can't buy me love piece, as true as it is difficult to codify. And this is the place that we have not taught. This is the thing we haven't taught ourselves yet, is how to value those things that we know to be valuable, right? So we talk about love like we talk about diversity and other things in sort of a Hallmarkian sort of way, when they have actual and true values, right? And we haven't learned how to internalize or to legitimize that value in the way that we do money on a ledger, right? So what is the ledger that lets us understand what's the proxy for love? How's that data fall out? And until we get sort of that kind of an accounting, we're not going to be able to figure this out.
Wow. Yeah.
I do think too, right? It is, and this is so much of, right? This is creating the future. It is changing the question. And I know things really changed dramatically for me in kind of all of the work that I've done, and frankly in my personal life, when I started thinking less about how much money do I need, and changed it to what do I need the money for, and working on projects. When you start thinking about, okay, if we had the money, what would that buy? Or what would that make possible? It gets you thinking creatively, and you start, it creates more of those opportunities for, okay, who else do we need to invite to the table? And I think also helps to break down that stereotypical, nonprofit equals scarcity and lack, and for-profit equals abundance, breaks down that relationship. Because the reality is, there was never a corporate partner that I ever had who didn't have some sort of need as well, right. And it dramatically changed my relationship to them. I think of one occasion where I was meeting with a woman who was a vice president at a bank, and she was very prepared for my solicitation. And I sat down just to have a conversation with her. And in the end, when she talked about, what I needed and her budget and how much money they might have for giving and how much they'd given already, and here's what's left and the timing or whatever, I said, here's the thing. Like, I actually believe I have something that you need. Like, you are a bank. You need people to open accounts here. And I have people. right? I have staff, I have clients, I have, 4,000 people who come to me every year looking to figure out how to start their life anew. And part of that's going to involve probably a bank account. And so, and in the end, I got free use of a really good conference room that had technology in it that I needed for what I wanted to do, but what couldn't have, didn't need to go out and buy. I didn't know where I would have put it. I didn't have the physical space in my building. I had use of a really beautiful, really comfortable space for meetings and for classes. And they had the opportunity to give back to the community without having to write a check and spread their name and their word a little bit. And so my abundance came together with theirs versus really like kind of sticking to that stereotypical dynamic of scarcity. And I think so. I think a big piece of it is changing that question and getting out of, and yes, I'm well aware that the electric company is all about me actually writing a check to them. So, right, it doesn't eliminate that need for money altogether. But when you can start to think more creatively about, okay, what is it that we're trying to do and what are those resources? Frankly, what I've always seen is the actual dollars tend to follow that, because now when I'm reaching out to a potential funder, whether it was in a grant application or some sort of proposal to a corporate partner, they could see the many other creative ways, the other resources that have already been brought to the table. And that's, their gift is leveraged all of that and is having that much greater impact and that much greater exposure. But it really took kind of stepping out of that idea that as a nonprofit or as nonprofits, we don't have anything. We're just people in need. Really recognizing all that we actually are bringing to the table.
I think
go ahead, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
Well, I think a big shift happens when we all start to take every label off except that you're my fellow community member. Because the woman at the bank was expecting something from you, because the reality is that's how that system has played out. The benefactor, what can you do for me, versus, and going into the conversation knowing that there could be that assumption. But when we actually can start to see each other as fellow community members, whether it's in a corporation, in a geographical setting, in the world, whatever that is, then things start to change in the conversation. The assumptions can kind of sift away. And I was thinking about the conversation about the indicators of success of a collective enoughness. They're already all around us. The stories that go viral in this world all the time are people sharing their resources, people bringing out the best in each other. That's the stuff we see on people's Facebook feeds, and then a year later, grandma picks it up and she's sending it again. So they keep coming out. They're already all around us, but where are we focusing and paying attention to? And if we start to deconstruct those viral stories, it is the spirit of collective enoughness.
It's so remarkable. I was thinking, Iffy, as you were talking, years and years ago when Dimitri and I founded the Diaper Bank, we spent many, and for those who don't know, Dimitri and I started the first diaper bank in the country. And we spent many, many months just trying to talk to people about what we were going to do and getting their ideas and the thought we kept getting back from people over and over again is, there are so many organizations in this community, do we really need another one? And we just kept hearing that over and over and over again. There's so many people competing for funds. Do we really need another organization? Which we all hear in communities everywhere. And it didn't matter that our answer was, yeah, but we're starting the first one. There is no such thing as a diaper bank. We're not duplicating. And what we found was that the question of quote, duplicating was that everybody was thinking first of a line item on a budget rather than sharing resources. And when we stopped thinking about what we needed as a line item on a budget and started to say, what functions does the diaper bank need to do? And who else is already doing those functions? And can we partner with them? What it turned into was, okay, the question started with the resource, but it turned into the relationship. And the one that I think about that always is just so meaningful is our warehousing. We needed to warehouse 1 million to 2 million diapers every year. We were going to need racks and forklifts and insurance and at least a part-time experienced warehouse person, because I didn't know anything about it. And we put out a note to, and this will tell you how long ago it was, we put out a broadcast fax to all of the organizations in our community. And we said, you know, we're not looking to rent, we're looking to partner. And we don't exactly know what that means, but let's talk about what that could mean. And the group that we wound up partnering with for a ridiculously reduced amount of rent was a group that was very much like Goodwill, that did training for folks with developmental disabilities. And what we have, Iffy, was we had stuff that they could train people on using a forklift and putting the stuff up 20 feet in the air, because if the diapers fell, it didn't matter. They weren't going to break. Nothing was going to go bad. And it never occurred to us we actually had something. But what we had was something that was deeply needed by this group, was stuff that they could train that couldn't break. And so it is just remarkable when we're asking that different question of what do we really need? And what does it make possible? And if we find out who else is doing this without feeling threatened by who else is doing this, because that's always the key. I can't believe we've got like 5 minutes left. I'm just getting started. I could talk with you guys for like another hour here. If you had something tangible, and I apologize that we have not been able to get to any of the Twitter questions, but we know that we will get to those in the post. So I promise we will answer everything in, all 4 of us will answer everything at the blog. If you guys had something that you would suggest to folks who are watching that they could do to pull more of that spirit of collective enoughness into their lives and into their workplaces, whether they work at a for-profit, a nonprofit, wherever they are, what might you suggest to folks?
So, Hilda, you know me well enough to know that I'm going to think about this for a long time now, and I'm going to come up with my best.
Posting it out at the blog like crazy.
I'm going to come up with my best answer after we're done. But on a very quick, kind of a quick response, hopefully, and in the interest of time, and frankly, remembering that it's Giving Tuesday, and I love Giving Tuesday. My college roommate works at the 92nd Street Y and was involved in the creation of Giving Tuesday. So I get so excited about that, and I follow her, and I'm watching everything that she's doing today. But one of the things that I recently heard her share in a conversation, I was I went to an event that she was speaking at just because she was there, and so I was eavesdropping on conversations, and somebody was asking her about where the most successful Giving Tuesday campaigns have been. And frankly, right, it's kind of some of the no-brainer stuff. If you have a puppy or a baby, like, you always float to the top. so my way of working around that was I figured out how to work puppies and babies into my marketing. But she said we're the best, and especially with like, you know, types of organizations that have struggled a little bit more, where the best campaigns have happened has been where they came together, where they stopped competing with each other and sat down and said, what does it mean if we talk about everything we're bringing to our community as arts organizations? You know, people don't always think of arts organizations as urgent, especially with a campaign like Giving Tuesday. So what's great going to look like, and what is it that we are bringing, and how can we come together and do that? But right, again, it takes this incredible courage. And so I always come back to that thing that I would encourage people to do or say to think about is be courageous and kind of letting that guard down. And what's the worst case scenario? But right, you know, like, are you really losing millions and millions of dollars? Like, what happens if we come together and say, what can we all do together? And not, instead of being focused on kind of, how do I out talk or out shout, or, outmarket this other organization. But what happens if we come and say, hey, community, this is what we do, and this is how we work in concert with each other, and this is ultimately how we are coming together to lift up our community. So it's a win-win-win, and having the courage to have those conversations and just take the chance.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to. So I wish I just said that and that I could take full credit for it. So maybe I won't say anything because that was beautiful. There was an organization that I just was at recently called Sphera.world. They're trying to build the infrastructure for that kind of behavior. Sort of what are the best practices for a variety of different things, and just give them to each other so that they can be shared. So I think that's just dead on, exactly right. I'm in a journey of trying of having stopped focusing on systems change, and that's the work that I had been doing, or at least that I had the hubris to tell myself that I was doing. And so I'm holding on to two questions or two sort of goals for myself right now that I think are worth others thinking about. The first one was to give up on being right. That's by far the hardest one for me. But it has led me into very interesting places and productive conversations. And then the other one is the one I mentioned earlier, which is this idea, the question of who is your neighbor, and always challenging that, never taking the easy answer to that question. And those have brought me to productive and painful places. So maybe that's my answer.
Oh, they're wonderful. Both of them are wonderful questions. What if I'm not right? There's one. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, right? And so my whole thing is like, rightness isn't really all that valuable, right? At the very best, it's temporary.
Yeah. And it certainly puts up walls. Wow. Rebecca, how about you? What would you share?
It's simple. What would it take for you to experiment and ask one other human in this big fat world to have coffee with you and to get to know that person and hear their winding path and you share yours? Whoever you're comfortable with, your mother, your coworker, the person down the street, your neighbor. Are you willing to experiment with getting to know each other first? Because as it's come up before, what it takes to be vulnerable and to be authentic is we actually have to know each other better. And it's okay to say, I've sat next to you in this office for 5 years. I know you like dogs and go away hiking, but we don't really know each other. So what would it take to be willing to experiment with this question and then see what that makes possible?
Wow. Yep. It's always about the people. It's always about the people. I guess as I'm listening to all of you and reflecting on what we've been talking about for this past hour, the question that arises for me that I would encourage people to ask is, what do I have that I can share? And that includes my being. So who am I that I can share? What do I have that I can share? And it could be a table or a trash can with your neighbor, or it could be a conference room, or it could be anything. And it opens the doors, because when we're worried about what do you have that I need, that's when we put the walls up. But it opens all of those doors when we start thinking about what we have that we can share. So thank you guys so very, very much. This has been wonderful. Like I said, I could talk for another hour. And we will, because we'll continue to talk in the blog comments. And if you are watching this and you tweet over to CT Future, we will capture those, put those in the blog comments as well. And I want to invite everyone who is listening, and all three of you guys, to join us in this huge experiment that is creating the future. We are experimenting in a whole bunch of different ways, and probably the most basic is our desire to know what you're experimenting with. So if you take anything out of this hour of our conversation today and you try it, let us know. and let us share it with the world so that we're all experimenting together. Because if there's one thing that all four of us talked about today, it's that systems don't currently naturally support what we're talking about here. And so as we're stepping out to experiment with different systems, the best thing that we can do is to share that with each other so that we're learning from it. And then Steve will figure out how to measure that, or we'll figure out we don't need to. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.